Begin my speech, one thing I have to make very clear before I start. This is not a debate between people who get good grades but burn out versus people who get bad grades but feel well. We argue that one, well-being is an important part of success itself, but two, people can still achieve success without extra suffering as compared to the status quo. As the Prime Minister of today's debate, this is my speech, first setting this debate up, then making a quick preemptory, and then two constructive arguments for the proposition bench. Moving on to setup. First of all, some characterization of the key terms and the status quo. Success. Look, success is not just career development in specialized areas. It's also about mental and physical health, which this narrative clearly disincentivizes through one, suffering for the sake of suffering, two, sacrificing free time to suffer, and three, pressure coming from teachers and parents to the most vulnerable part of our population that needs adequate mental and physical health. A good mental and physical health is the prerequisite to success because A, without a good mental and physical state, work becomes inefficient. You cannot study math problems when you're feeling extremely sleepy, right? And two, this well-being is a part of success itself. Like, one is not truly successful if they get A star on a paper after nearly getting a heart attack from studying too late. Two, what does this narrative look like? First, under this narrative, everyone who complains about suffering will be actively ostracized as failures, seen as weak and vulnerable, and they're afraid to show this emotional vulnerability. Whereas people pushing this narrative will be gaslighting these vulnerable people. When people express exhaustion and frustration, they will frame this as a character flaw of a lack or a lack of grit. Now, this narrative is already pushed in the status quo to some extent. We already see in the status quo students from all around the world beginning school at very early time, returning back core after hours of hard work only to finish more homework, and parents pushing them to do extracurriculars because they have to suffer to get to success. If this is pushed even more, we'll prove to you how this will lead to even more devastating impacts. Judges, let me make one thing very clear to you. We agree that this narrative pushes people to work for longer periods of time and pushes people to force themselves towards physical and mental limits. If OP wants to prove the effectiveness of this narrative, even if they can successfully prove that, it does not matter. Because we can show to you that people do not need this suffering to succeed, and people don't become happier and healthier with this extra suffering, right? We agree that they will put more work, but we can show you how in the status quo people work hard enough to already be able to achieve personal definitions of development and success. Therefore, this extra work will only go down the other way, making meaningless pain for them. So, moving on to my preemptory, I'll be proving why success can be achieved even without this narrative. Now, note my wording here. I'm saying that success can be achieved without this narrative, not success can be achieved without hard work. We say that people will still work hard and endure through some obstacle even without the strongly demanding narrative. So now let's look at the incentive and the capacity. Incentive. First of all, people will still want to succeed even without this narrative because success, it means monetary earnings or personal happiness. This is a lifelong benefit for them. Now, people want to succeed. Even without this narrative, people will still be willing to trade some extent of efforts for this benefit. The only difference here is that now they will be controlling their efforts. They will know how much they're willing to sacrifice for this success. They will stop pushing themselves over the limit and stop suffering if it's not worth the benefit for them. Now, capacity. People are still be able to work hard in the status quo because under status quo, they already work hard enough. The design of social systems like schools, companies, businesses, they already require work even without this narrative. It's not like if people don't believe it, they have to suffer through hours to do homework, they will stop doing homework. The lack of this narrative does not mean the disruption of existing social systems and hard work in daily life. So, moving on to my two substantive points. Thank you. Yes, take it.
So basically, talking about homework, right? And the people feels like homework is maybe not required for their academic success. What is their incentive to still doing the homework anyways?
First of all, like I've shown you, most people know that homework helps with their learning. And if they want to learn well and get a good grade in the future, they will want to do the homework. And now they will be doing this homework more efficiently because they know how much time they're willing to spend on it. Argument one. People will push themselves to unsustainable limits with this narrative. This is a point applicable to all kind of fields, but since it's easier to measure limit in a physical way, I'll be mechanizing this with a sports example. So in the sports, there are two sides of people, right? The coach and the one playing the sport. In the other words, the one pushing their narrative and the one receiving it. So what does this narrative look like on both sides? For the person doing the sport, they know when they're reaching their physical limit. But like I've said in the setup, they feel humiliated for showing emotional vulnerability. So they're unwilling to express it even if they're burning out. For coaches, they will not be actively tracking the trainee's health status because when suffering is seen as a norm, it's normal for the people to look tired. It's normal for them to be gasping for air. And even if the person playing the sport expresses their pain and suffering, in order to motivate the people to keep working, coaches will tell them to just hold it, just keep working because that's how you improve. And this is still applicable to any any other field. For example, when a student is tired, a tutor tells them to keep learning, etc. What is the impact of this? Let me just establish a very important fact. Most people receiving this narrative is vulnerable. Like in a student-teacher relationship, in a trainee-coach relationship, there is a power imbalance, right? The students and the trainees are forced to accept this narrative and they cannot fight back even if they clearly went past their limit. This harm is exclusive because without the narrative, they know that not wanting to suffer is okay, so they're allowed to quit and they're willing to express their suffering, right? So in the base case scenario, this already means obviously physical and mental harm of some sort, which does not benefit them at all, which I'll be mechanizing in my next argument. And in extreme cases, like in the status quo, we already know high suicide rates, high burnout rates of students dying of heart attacks. So this will actually be harming real lives in extreme cases, right? Okay, moving on to my second argument, the lack of efficiency and effectiveness of such suffering. In the status quo, we all know the idea of work smart, not hard, right? Two layers of mechanism behind this. First, the idea of time management and controlled efforts. Let's compare two cases, right? So, student A, they are ready to pull an all-nighter because they think that this all-nighter suffering is necessary for them to achieve success. They don't care how long they stay up until. They will sleep when they finish the work, no matter how late it is. What does this lead to? This leads to no low efficiency and low effectiveness of their work. They are doing textbook questions as many as they can just because they want to suffer through it. Because, oh, I'm only seen as working hard if I spend more time on more questions. Now, let's look at student B. Student B has a reasonable expectation of how much work they are willing to put into for this academic success. For example, they have set a bedtime for themselves to sleep at 10. This does not mean that they're lazy and they're doing less work. This means that they will try harder to do as much as possible within this limited time, which means that they'll be working more efficiently. They're only picking topics to study that they don't already understand. They're only doing the most important questions, and they're using every bit of time and effort in this controlled way that benefits them more. What is this impact? When you have controlled suffering and a reasonable idea of how much suffering you're willing to go through, you make meaning out of this suffering. Maybe in case A, in student A, they still end up with good grades, but you can achieve similar results with student B while not sacrificing huge amount of time and well-being, which we have already proven is extremely important on our side. So they achieve the same goals more quickly and more comfortably. Second of all, the status of these people themselves. When they're suffering, they're often already at the edge. So if someone's playing badminton, if they're already fatigued, they cannot run and they keep missing the balls, then what is the point of keep training? Does the suffering still help them? It's clear that people can study and work more efficiently when they're in a better physical and mental state. For example, when they're more focused or when they're physically more capable. When they're burnt out, the extra suffering will only harm their well-being and not help with their actual training and learning. In the alternative, if we take breaks and use controlled efforts, as previously said, this improves well-being and efficiency. For all the above reasons, never prouder to propose. Thank you.
Let's start with the framing, right? We have two pieces of framing. First, we don't see the narrative as a social norm that everyone needs to follow. Instead, it's just a narrative. The idea is generally correct. We think the idea of suffering to have suffering as a process to gain success is a generally good and morally correct idea. Second, we define suffering as a process where people work hard or experience hardship. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to face mental health problems or you have to work yourself to death to mean you are suffering. Suffering only means when you're working hard, when you don't doubt to do this, when you don't want to do this in normal life, you just want to sleep or study or rest. But because you want to achieve the success, you are doing so. This is what we define as suffering, not what our opponents' narrow policy of facing mental health issues and not sleeping as suffering. Moving on to our main points. Our first point is that we encourage people because many people nowadays think that if I have talent, I can choose to not work that hard as much because I have talent, so I can just achieve all that success. As opposition, we believe such a narrative would solve this problem because it is very harmful. Two ways. First, we tell people without working hard, you can't get success. It's necessary to work hard in order to maintain this success. Second, we persuade people to work hard because we motivate. Yes.
Do you think that working hard equates to suffering?
Or it's already defined. We define working hard as something that you originally wouldn't want to do, but we want to relax instead of your narrow policy of working yourself to death as suffering. Like normal students, everyone wants to rest, everyone wants to relax, everyone wants to scroll on their phone when they don't have school, right? But when they are working hard to achieve success, we define this as suffering, not your narrow policy of working yourself to death. That's not applying for every single person. Moving on to continuing with my speech. So we told you the second reason is that we persuade people to work hard because we motivate them. We tell them that if you don't work hard, you will not be able to gain success, not just because you have talent. You have to work hard than other people to get the success that you deserve. The impact is that we motivate people. We give them incentive to work hard. For example, if I'm a debater, I have to prepare for my comment in order to get success, right? I can't just wait for the competition and say, oh, I have very good talent and I'll be able to champ. That's not realistic, right? Second argument is that we increase the fulfillment. Suffering is the fertile ground of literature. Only when a person is going through adversity will they generate more motivation, not just to like inspire, influence themselves, but also to inspire future generations of literature, right? We think when they understand that happiness doesn't come easily, it enhances their sense of happiness, encourages young people to make progress, reflect social progress, and makes them realize that actually happiness is hard to come by. So we have to work hard to gain this happiness, to gain the success, to gain the fulfillment that we want. So in order to learn more from the experience that we are currently having, right? So thus we think the impact is very large because when fulfillment increases, this means that people will enjoy their process of working hard, enjoy the success, enjoy the happiness after they gain the success even more. Our third argument is how we think it's morally correct to have such a narrative. Thus, it's a principal argument. We tell that people, as long as we work hard, there will be success. This incentivizes them and motivates them. It tells them that there's such a narrative, there's such a statement that it's good to do so. We think by this, we improve the resilience of people because once they fail once, they will believe that as long as I work hard for the next time, I will improve. And thus, the reality is the same. We do improve after we fail once because we get to know what the way is. Thus, having this narrative means that after we can improve after once, and this increases our resilience, so we will not just give up after we fail once. Moving on to so furthermore, we think that on our moving on to some attack to our opponents, like at the start of define the debate, they say that the status quo means students are suffering, students are working hard, students are not sleeping and facing suicide and also other mental health issues. We think first that's very untrue because not all countries in the world and not every single student in the world are facing these issues. Only some countries, like take a clear example like China, is doing this. The reason for this is not because there's a social norm, it's not because there's a narrative. The reason China is extremely Chinese students are extremely working hard is because Chinese is a very competitive country with a large population but a limited number of job places. That's the only reason these students are working hard. We don't think getting rid of this narrative and imposing this narrative will suddenly make all these students not working themselves to death, not take these extracurricular activities, and so on. Thus, given this example, we believe most of the reasons that students are actually working themselves to death, that the parents are pushing their students their children so much, is not due to like the narrative that you have to suffer, you have to work yourself to death in order to get success. It is due to the problem that the place they are born with, the environment around them is too much competitive. Thus, even if our opponents prove that they can get down this narrative, they cannot achieve the so-called impact that their side claims to prove. Furthermore, moving on, when they say that they get more flexibility by being able to control how your maximization of time while you're learning, right? We think this also works under hard work because when you maximize your time, you still work harder within a short amount of time. That's still working hard. Working hard is, as I defined at the start of my speech, what we define as suffering, because we don't think it's very charitable to define suffering as a so narrow policy of working yourself to death, right? So thus under this, even if you, let's say, shorten your time to 1 hour and you want to finish a certain task, that is still called hard working, that is still called our definition of suffering. Thus we think Judge on this side, what they're trying to say on how they control the efforts also works under our side, and it works better because we tell people when you work hard even more, you can get your success. This means they are incentivized more. They have more motivation to actually work hard under this narrative and to actually work hard in the time limit they set for themselves. So there isn't a guarantee of flexibility. Our side is what brings you this actual idea, the actual motivation that helps students to do so. Their main argument from their side is that they've given it two examples and they say that people will be pushed to their limits, which is harmful. Two responses. First, we think pushing people to their limits is not necessarily harmful because staying always in your comfortable zone is what stops you from improving. When you get out of your comfort zones, that's what stops the echoing chamber of what you are currently doing. The only way to improve is to try something that is harder, not just staying with what you think is easy. There's no way to improve when you're always doing something that you think, that you see, that you sense as easy, right? So thus, we don't think pushing people to limits is bad. It's just that on your side, what they're defining as pushing people to limits is to work people to death, is to make people like run for 10 hours nonstop or things like this. That's not what our side is doing. That's like not humane. So we don't think that is charitable and counted under this topic, right? Furthermore, they say how there's low efficiency. We think there's never low efficiency when people are actually working harder in less of time. So thus we are the side that actually solves all the problems coming from their side, while their side is just defining a very narrow policy that is uncharitable for us to debate about. Thus, never so proud to oppose. Thank you.
Panel. Last time I checked, someone is not successful if they get good grades after compromising their physical and mental health. Someone is not successful if they become sick in a hospital bed just because they had to work an all-nighter for their boss. And someone is not successful if they have a trophy at hand but hollowness in their heart. Very importantly, the money and the grades is the last bit of success. The pathway and process towards success matters more. Suffering makes this process 1, less enjoyable, and 2, less efficient and effective. So what is the one thing opposition keeps pushing and pushing in today's debate? The idea of pain is gain, pain is gain, and pain is gain. Before the thousands of parents who miss their children growing up happily, the millions of youth who traded their mental health for a single degree, and the billions of souls who told that their current life is merely a sacrifice for the future that never arrives, what will they think? Are they truly successful, or have they simply been robbed of the life that they will, of the only life that they will ever have? Incredibly proud to propose. This House strongly opposes the narrative that suffering is required for success. As a DPM, 3 things on my speech: rebuttals, extension, and rebuilding if time allows. Firstly, moving on to rebuttals. Firstly, Op reframes the debate as how suffering will just be hard work. First, they said that this will not be the social norm, but that is literally the definition of the narrative, right? It means that people are pushing it. It means that people pushing it will push it. People receiving are brainwashed into thinking that's true. The narrative is not a filter. Only those who want to believe in it will believe in it. They claim this. However, it will reach the entire society because for a narrative to be actively promoted, it will ostracize the people who don't merely follow the narrative. The most vulnerable stakeholder in today's debate is the students, trainees who are naive and believe anything they are told, right? If they are told this at an early age, this means that they will likely to believe that without challenging and questioning, oh, is this pain really worth it? Then they say that they define suffering as working hard and not dying. Firstly, it goes against the info side because the info side states that that this narrative promotes that success is often associated with hardship, sacrifice, long working hours, and emotional or physical suffering. So this exactly supports our side. And secondly, even if we disregard the info side as a whole, when this narrative exists, they cannot prove why people will still be conscious of their own limits, because this narrative just proves that suffering is required for success. It doesn't state any amount of when you should stop suffering. Right, we already show you that they will not be brave enough to voice out and stop suffering. Next, they frame suffering as unequal to like destroying mental health, right? But suffering is toxic and will by definition is toxic. By English definition is toxic and will lead to distress, pain, or hardship that compromises one's core well-being, which is depletive and destructive, supporting our side. Next will be more motivation, not accepted right now. Firstly, this is not unique to their side, as already proved and framed by the PM. People will always want success with or without this, right? People are not motivated to work hard because they think they will suffer. It is the exact opposite, as proved previously. Fourthly, they claim that people will push themselves to the limit outside of comfort zone and embrace challenges. We admit that this may be true to some extent, but 1, it is not the case for the majority of people, and 2, even if it is, the harm and risks outweigh the potential benefits, right? For the majority of people, they are not smart enough to think, how do I pick the most effective way of learning, and how do I get out of my comfort zone? Like learning math, their side assumes that people will just actively pick more difficult and challenging problems or topics, but under this narrative, the easiest way to quantify suffering is doing more problems for longer hours. And secondly, even if many people are pushing outside their comfort zone, for the group of people who go past their limits and actually face detrimental and physical mental harm, 1, this impact is irreversible, leading to things like suicide, which we already see in the status quo when this narrative is only pushed to some extent, and 2, there are huge harms to the most basic human right. say that, oh, we are not so inhumane to force students to die, but that literally still happens, and unfortunately, it is cruel as it is. As previously proven, why vulnerable stakeholders are likely to not voice out or voice out discomfort, leading to a huge risk of physical and mental injury. Next, they say that it will increase fulfillment. However, I will respond to this by directly clashing with this through my extension. Now, what is my extension? Here, my extension in today's debate is a very important one. It's the devaluation of success. Right, in the status quo, the suffering narrative has become a social filter through which we view achievement. Right, we don't just ask what do you do. We ask what did it cost you to achieve this. Success is no longer an objective milestone in our opponent's world. So it is a moral judgment, right? This creates a culture of like meritocratic trauma, where your win is tied to the visible scars you carry. What are the so how will it harm the stakeholders here? Firstly, for those who reach success through efficiency, talent, or luck without suffering, the narrative creates a default state where they feel bad about themselves. Three layers to this. One is society says success requires suffering. Then those who found a smart way or had a smoother path will feel that their success is unearned or fake because suffering is required for success. Two, to regain social legitimacy, these people often have to manufacture or seek out unnecessary hardship, right? They overwork or self-sabotage just to prove that they belong on the top and that they earn their success. And three, success brings anxiety rather than fulfillment, right? This clashes with their point. The narrative robs the most efficient members of society of their peace of mind, forcing them into a cycle of performative suffering just to justify their status of success. Two, for those in developing nations or social economic conditions, this narrative acts as a cruel gaslighting mechanism, right? Three layers to this. One, these people often suffer exponentially more than their counterparts in other states just to reach the baseline level of survival. So they don't have that much opportunities, which means that ultimately, inherently, they have less chance of success. However, they suffer much more than other people. So they will feel like they are failures because although they put into so much suffering, it doesn't inherently lead to their success. Therefore, never prouder to propose. Thank you.
Propaganda side is trying to push this debate into extremely extreme characterization of suffering. Success is required of suffering, but it doesn't mean that infinite suffering equals to success. George, I feel like our opponent is basically characterizing that how people are dying or like students are working hard and working over hours, and if people know that success might require suffering, they'll work to death and they'll never stop, and they'll feel like, oh, because others are still working and I feel like I still haven't suffered enough, I should always suffer. Judge, we directly deny this, right? I feel like we should directly clash their uncharitable definition of suffering. Judge, note the wording of the motion, right? Success is required of sufferings, right? It doesn't say that how you always need suffering in order to success, or suffering directly costs success, Judge. We talked about an publisher side, their characterization of the narrative of success and how it looks like, oh, you do not always need to suffer in order to achieve success, right? And which then leads to students thinking that, oh, maybe if I did not work hard enough, maybe if I still did not suffer, I still will be able to achieve those success. Bring them a huge excuse of them not working hard enough, right? So you saw that, George. Currently, what our opponent characterizes how in the modern society, the reason why people are suiciding, the reason why people are having mental health is because of the narrative that people should suffer. We directly deny this, right? We tell the current society the reason why our students are working so hard is because of the competitiveness, not because of the narrative of success might need some sort of suffering, right? And it's because they see that, oh, others are working really hard. I should not stop. I should also be better than them, right? This is a sense of competitiveness that leads them to furthermore have extremely long working hours that work to death, right? So we tell that our narrative of only requiring some sort of suffering need actually lead them into a longer working hours, but does not mean that you should work till death, right? So yeah, your POI.
If these physical and mental health issues such as suicide exist in the current status quo where this is only promoted to some extent and exponentially widening and increasing in the status quo, how will your side ensure that inherently these physical and mental health issues will suddenly disappear when this narrative is pushed even more?
Okay, I think the mental health and physical health issue doesn't mean you're dead or like you get depression, right? The current mental health issue and maybe like some sort of mental, for example, you did not want to do something, right? And then, however, you still force yourself because you know that some suffering is needed for your success, right? And that's when, for example, you might have some sort of mental issues or because you did not want to do this, right? So it's still some sort of mental suffering. For example, you want to always relax, you want to play video games, but you do not want to do homework, right? But if you still do the homework, that is still some sort of mental suffering, right? Because you're not doing the things that you want to do, right? That is also called mental suffering. Mental suffering doesn't always mean that, oh, you should have mental health problems or have extremely bad depression, right? That is not what mental problems be like or mental sufferings be, right? Moving on. So yes, so moving on, right? Our opponent says that how like the people will know how when to stop when they're working, right? They also have some effort and where to achieve all of the benefits and where to achieve all the success. Should we directly deny this, right? The reason why people need this push of success, the reason why people need the narrative to push them that some suffering is enough is because majority of people feels like and their side, right? Majority of people feels like this some efforts might be zero or like not exceed their comfort zones, right? Because John, we thought that we characterize exceeding their mental like comfort zones means that you're feeling uncomfortable, right? And uncomfortable might mean some sort of mental suffering or physical suffering, right? The comfort zone, for example, right? If you're running and having some sort of racing, right? If you feel you always just want to maintain your speed, you never want to increase your speed, right? You feel like you're always in the comfort zone, and that is the effort you pay. But we told that with some sort of suffering, you know that, oh, maybe I should try a bit harder, right? Maybe even though I feel a bit more tiring today, I feel like maybe I will be able to, for example, have a faster speed. I will see improvement, right? That's how you see improvement. It's just not suffering doesn't mean you just suddenly stop all everything and you just suddenly just always work hard till night, right? We taught George, we taught on their side, I'll probably look into another extreme when people do not want to exceed their comfort zone, right? We do not deny that some sort of improvement might happen, but we thought that those improvement might be minimum or not even or even zero, right? Only when you have a narrative that some sort of working, some sort of suffering is still needed and work for your success, we thought that is also really important because on their side, they're basically telling you that, oh, maybe no suffering is still needed. And moving on, right? So we thought that how do people know when it is suitable to stop suffering or relax, right? We talk to majority of people in order to, for example, avoid the so-called mental suffering our opponent called. They'll probably, for example, they feel like the temporary relaxation, so because majority of people are short-termist, right? They feel like temporary relaxation overweight was so-called long-term benefits, right? So therefore, without the suffering, without the sense of the suffering might be important for your long-term, they feel like, oh, even if I did not work hard right now, even though I did not sacrifice my time, or even I did not sacrifice my relaxation, then I will still achieve success, right? Maybe I will still exceed this success. It's giving them some sort of possibility and some sort of mindset that even if I did not work hard, there's still possibility for me to success, right? And this sort of ideas directly give them an excuse to not working hard, right? To how to judge our opponent, basically their narrative will call even more toxic to normal students and normal citizens because they feel like not enough, like basically not, even without a lot of stuff, even without some sort of suffering, there will still exist problems, right? Yeah, moving on to how effectiveness. They talk about how like success does not require suffering. And if people have limited time, they will actually use their time more effectively. Should we directly deny this, right? Because even if people feel like suffering is not required for their success, why will they still spend a lot of concentration or efficiency in their work, right? We tell that even when they feel like some sort of they feel like suffering is not required, when they feel like minimum suffering is required, they do not want to exceed the sense of suffering because none of the people are still suffering, right? They feel like, oh, others are not as competitive, others is not working, right? And then which leads them into, for example, less efficiency, or even if there is efficiency, they will tend to work in shorter hours because they want to avoid the so-called mental sufferings that they really have. George, let's say the worst case scenario, right? Even if, let's say, people are still extremely competitive and work extremely hard, we thought that at least we thought that they still achieve some sort of improvement. As long working hours or like some sufferings is still required for their better results. We thought that it's much better when our opponents like every people is lazy, and because there's minimum amount of competitiveness, none of people are exceeding their comfort zones, and people only maintain in the position they are. That's all. Thank you so much. Proud to oppose.
In this debate, opposition has been continuously phrasing in a way of suffering equates to putting in efforts or pushing to your limits. Proposition has already proved continuously that this is just totally flawed and absurd. Suffering, by its definition, both in the dictionary and the info side, means working hard to such an extent when it's already totally exceeding someone's physical and mental limits, and it's already make the person feel very intense fatigue or pain. Therefore, our opponent simply misunderstood the motion. So first, he started with some rebuttals. Opposition said that without the narrative of suffering is required for success, people won't try hard anymore. However, we believe this argument is just totally flawed. So 3 layers of our rebuttals. Firstly, we have already fully demonstrated that people continue to work hard and succeed even in a culture that doesn't promote suffering. In our world, individuals have plenty of incentives to also achieve, whether it's personal goals, community support, or like financial rewards, right? People are more motivated when they can pursue their passions in a healthy environment rather than through constant hardship and stress. For example, many successful companies also prioritize employees' health, well-being, and productivity. They encourage their workers to maintain a healthy work-life balance, going to bed at reasonable hours, such as 11 p.m. instead of 1 or 2 p.m. on their side. Those employees are actually more efficient in their work, achieving better results without the need for suffering or long hours. Secondly, competition can still exist without the need for suffering, and it can be based on efficiency rather than how much someone can suffer, right? When success is framed around healthy competition and collaboration, it allows people to focus on what they can accomplish in a limited amount of time, rather than how much they can personally suffer until like 1 or 2 p.m. Finally, relying on suffering as a motivator can be very counterproductive in the long run. It can lead to burnout and mental health issues, which ultimately reduces productivity and motivation. By promoting a narrative that emphasizes healthy effort over hardship, we, as the proposition, can encourage sustained motivation and efforts and success without the negative consequences associated with suffering. So now moving on to the clashes in this debate. First clash on health. Proposition believes that the narrative of suffering is required for success simply crushes both people's mental and physical health. So opposition said that, suffering motivates people because it teaches them that happiness is hard to achieve, and after they achieve the success, they can feel more happy, right? However, 3 layers of rebuttals. Firstly, what they are talking about is is to manipulate people into thinking that happiness is nearly impossible to achieve without suffering and actually succeeding. This suggests that true happiness only comes from enduring extreme suffering, like getting a top grade and then winning a competition. This sets an unrealistically high standard, making ordinary people feel very ashamed if they haven't suffered significantly or achieved these very, very unrealistic high goals. So, for example, if someone didn't receive a very good grade, but hasn't experienced so much hardship, they will feel undeserved of happiness. They can lead to low self-esteem and the belief that their happiness is invalid because simply they didn't go through so much suffering. This mindset takes away the joy in everyday life and makes achieving happiness seem out of reach. Secondly, suffering can lead to burnout rather than genuine happiness, because if someone goes through excessive hardship and suffering without adequate breaks or support, they can just feel like very exhausted, right? Even if they finally achieve these top goals, they might find themselves too burnt out to enjoy the so-called happiness that comes from success, as the opposition claimed. And thirdly, by pushing the idea that happiness is only achievable after suffering and succeeding, we create a dangerous cycle. Why? Because if someone endures suffering and fails to achieve their goals, which is very likely in this world, right? They might feel that they will never find happiness. This can lead to suffer even more, working harder in a desperate attempt to succeed, which can damage their mental health. So now, the opposition said that suicides in places no PI in China occur due to the large population and not because of the narrative that suffering is required for success. However, this is simply flawed. So 2 pieces of rebuttals. Firstly, the size of population does not account for the specific cultural pressures related to success. In cultures where, like China, success is heavily tied to hardship, sacrifice, and suffer, individuals may feel very immense pressure to achieve high standards. This narrative can also lead to feelings of inadequacy and hopelessness, especially in a densely populated country like China, where competition is already fierce. Secondly, focusing solely on population size overlooks the need for also cultural change regarding success and mental health awareness. Changes in narrative can also lead to better outcomes by encouraging individuals to seek health and fostering environments where mental health is actually prioritized. So let's compare upward and upward. No, PI, thank you. On upward, success is narrowly defined in terms of career milestones or competitive rankings, academics, right? So what happens? People on opposition side are pressured. For example, students are going to multiple classes, study extremely hard and late, and even lack physical exercise because of the influence of the narrative. Just like the status quo, every year more than 900 students before 17 in the world suicide due to academic pressure. Aside from suicides, 1 in 20 students in the world have a certain degree of mental illness due to the pressure from schools, parents, and more. When this narrative is becoming increasingly dominant, this number can also continue to increase. Adults also work day and night without any free time or resting time. However, on propositional world, people work as hard as they can, but not to the extent that they suffer, and they get fulfilled and happy about whatever achievement that they can get at last. The next time they can try again. So a truly successful life includes various aspects, including health and also overall happiness. When people believe that suffering is a narrative, like a part of achieving success, they neglect these other crucial areas. Health is the prerequisite of success and also part of it. Life is a long marathon, and success only comes when people can finally find the balance when running. When the narrative of suffering is required for success already crushes people and causes them to lose their lives or get mental illness, at the very start of this journey, people should realize that this is not worth it. Sure, some people are able to persevere through and finally finish the marathon successfully, but the health of the broader majority shouldn't be ignored. Only slowly but steadily finishing the marathon without a huge burden weighing them down can a person truly succeed in the long run. So, second clash on approach versus suffering. Proposition believes that even if for those who define success merely through career development or academic achievement, the approach taken to reach these goals is often more meaningful than the pain endured. So, for example, in a scenario where a student has to prepare for assessment for the following day, let's see what happens in the prop side versus the op side. In opposition world, the students study really hard for 9 or 10 hours until 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. without any methods, but repetitively practicing papers, even though maybe they already did them once because they believe that suffering is required for success. Then on the second day, because of the lack of sleep and learning in a very extremely tired state, the student forgot a lot and then of what they revised and crashes in the test. And then the students drop into a cycle of stress and depression because of failure and become irrational and continue on the crazy study. So let's see what happens on proposition side. The student chooses to study smartly with effective techniques like spaced repetition, active recall, or identifying their advantages and disadvantages and the targeted training, etc., combined with 2 or 3 hours of actually efficient learning rather than just studying hard until like 1 a.m. And then afterwards, the students can even spend 30 minutes reading a book or sleeping early. On the second day, the student feels refreshed and performs well in the test. And then the student very gets encouraged and motivated to continue on using this tactic and continues to succeed in the long run. So therefore, because prop has proved how, firstly, people will still have the full incentive to work hard but not exceed their limits and suffer in our world, and secondly, how people will be able to achieve the same or even more success without suffering in comparison to the opposition. Therefore, proposition obviously won this debate. Thank you.
Firstly, a clarification. Our side believes that it very, very likely that our opponent is being uncharitable. You just assume that people will work hard on their side of the house and will have, for example, a very effective time schedule or whatever, right? Which is actually a fatal flaw in this case. Our side believes that for the majority of those people, not the minority of those people who are talented and have very good time management, for them success needs hard working. And very likely that for the majority of those people are actually like, for example, they're actually quite lazy and nature, right? It's quite likely that when they go to school, instead of working hard or, for example, working an effective schedule, it's far more likely for them to, for example, relax or so, right? Because I believe that our side believes that our opponent never actually clarified why people actually work hard on their side of the house. It is only on our side of the house that because of this narrative that we can motivate people who are actually procrastinating to work hard at the normal standards, not by pushing them over the minutes. So proud to oppose.
POI?
So yeah, what's your POI?
Given that we already provided mechanism for this characterization, 1, suffering for the sake of suffering, 2, sacrificing free time to suffer, and 3, parental pressure to the most vulnerable part of our
firstly,
population.
I believe that our side already
Evidence?
explained to you.
Sorry, I'm not finished with my POI.
Yeah, I think that you have already finished, right? You have already given 2 mechanisms. Firstly, our side believes that it's very likely in the status quo that we already explained to you that it's very likely that it won't be so extreme as I have said, right? And I will also clarify this in my speech. Secondly, our side believes that it's very, very likely that well-being is actually very unlikely that people will suffer huge amount on the things like you said, right? Like, for example, the pressure also is actually highly unlikely in the status quo. It's not, for example, caused by this narrative, it's caused by the society. I want to try to prove that it's cultural pressure. However, most people are actually trying to avoid suffering because of their laziness or stuff, even with, for example, this cultural pressure, right? The only reason that they do that is because of the unfair amount of competition and that naturally forms in a society, as our second speaker had already explained, is not, for example, caused by this. And secondly, also I believe that it's very likely that success is like a very important thing in this debate, right? In our opponent's side of the house, only the minority succeeds. Our side believes that it's very likely that it's only on our side of the house that we encourage those procrastinators to work hard. Even our opponent says that, oh, like they will push over their standards, so what? I believe that our side's impact of giving them the chance of succeed instead of making them to a guy who procrastinate and doesn't do anything, it's much better than the impact that your side had already provided, right? Yeah. So now moving on to some other mechanisms about why this suffering is very likely that won't push people over to limits. First, our side believes that it's very likely that it's just opposed to the people's conscience that they will force themselves to suffer, right? Our side believes that most of the people of those houses, it's very likely that they do not want to suffer, they do not want to work so hard. They're humans, right? So because I believe that our side had already proven to you that it's unlikely that they will be pushed to for most procrastinators, our side believes that it's highly unlikely for them, for example, to push into the limits anyway, right? For example, our side believes what counts as suffering is actually, for example, working hard, working 1 hour more per day, or for example, feeling bad for failing a competition or etc. because you didn't work hard. That's so extreme as our opponent said. Secondly, what's this is actually going to do? Firstly, our side believes that if it's so as widespread as our opponent actually proven, our side believes that it is just going to make most of those procrastinators to have much more incentive to work hard, like not push your limits or perhaps not too hard. Because, for example, much more better than before, right? For example, a procrastinator may want to, for example, review for 1 hour per day, other than, for example, just watching video games and like playing your phone or etc. Right? Secondly, our side believes that it's very likely that for most of those people, they can succeed at the end. The only reason that they don't is because of the suffering they gave up. Because of this narrative, it's quite unlikely that they will give up, right? They believe that because of this suffering, I'm suffering, it's very likely that will lead to success. Even if they don't succeed in the end, it's very likely that you have much higher chance to do so, right? Yeah, than our opponent's side of the house, where they just assume that everyone will work so hard and will so want to succeed and will have such an effective time schedule that no motivation is needed. So now we want to do some clashing. Firstly, on well-being, I believe that ours I had already minimized the impacts of it, right? We already told you clearly that very likely the competition is not caused by this narrative, it's caused by the social structure. And a lot of those places in the world, like a social structure, like for example, America or etc., right? Even if you see this narrative, it doesn't cause much of an impact. Secondly, ours I believe that the burnout, those extreme cases, as our opponent said, it is very likely that will only affect those people who are burned out in both sides of the house, right? Ours, I believe that for most of those lazy people in the state, even if they hear this narrative, it's quite unlikely that they will still want to suffer, right? It's very likely that this will just motivate them to work hard for a bit, because it's only with those people that will burn out on your side and overwork them so much on your side of the house, they'll still be burnt out. And like, even if our opponent actually proven that everyone will like work very hard, it's still a very low possibility. Thirdly, for those students and trainees, our side believes that it's very likely that those trainers and teachers, they have the incentive to make them to work hard in any side of the house, right? It's very likely that because of the society structure and etc., our opponent just can't prove that. And because even if our opponent went on a well-being clash, our side believes that it is just a huge it's just like the minimum impact with just some people, which is actually a low probability of being burned out, which is unimportant in debate. Secondly, moving on to success. Why does your side not move to success? Our side believes that it very because that your side there's no procrastination. In the end, only the minority will work anyway, right? It's only on our side of the house because of this narrative. We actually encourage those people who work hard. We ask those procrastinators to have much less likely to, for example, to just procrastinate, right? And we encourage those people who are actually going to give up because of those suffering and hardship. We encourage them to work harder and lead to success and never give up, because I believe the other side have far more likely to, for example, to succeed, right? Even though we still have much better productivity and efficiency in the society as a whole. Therefore, I believe that our side should win this debate because we both win on well-being and success. Even our opponent proven that well-being too. Our side believes that making someone to be succeed, making the majority of people to be succeed, is much more impact than making the minority of you to have some mental problems, right? Our side has a far more impact in this debate. So because opposition. Thank you very much.
The reason why Providence and I lost the debate is when they open up a narrative that suffering is never necessary for success. That's when they lost the debate, that nobody feels that suffering is necessary. Therefore, nobody will exceed their comfort zone. Nobody will try to suffer. And for majority of the people, suffering is actually the basis of their success, for improvement, for exceeding their limits, and that's how they become better, right? So first, Jordan, I'm gonna give an incentive analysis about how when people are actually suffering, will they just work till death, what is our opponent characterization, or they know to what extent should they suffer, right? And secondly, moving on to another, basically another analysis about what will people react when they feel like suffering is not even necessary for their success. Will they keep working hard, as our opponent said, or then will they actually, for example, not trying to exceed their comfort zone, will only like occasionally work a bit harder, right? Now moving on, right? Firstly, judge to the incentive analysis. Now, how when people react when they feel like their suffering is necessary? I don't really think that how when people feel like suffering is necessary, it means that they will work till death. It means that they will directly dead or like feel to get depression and so on, right? So you tell that when they feel like suffering is important, suffering doesn't need to be like, for example, you need to work overnight, but it actually maybe also mean that sacrificing your time of relaxing to read a little bit more books, to do the things that you do not want, but it's also necessary for your improvement, right? We thought that to some extent, people will actually know to which extent are they feeling like their suffering is enough, right? They know that they should suffer, but it doesn't mean that they should go through infinite suffering, right? So when they feel like they suffer a bit more each time, they see a bit exceeding their comfort zone each time, and that's how they get some improvement to each time, right? We tell that when our opponent characterizes how people will work till death, that is mainly because of competitiveness, as we have already explained, right? That's when people feels like, oh, we should always be better than others. That's the sense of competitiveness, but not the sense of you should suffer, right? Suffering doesn't mean that you should be better than others, right? So that's completely two different characterization of success. Therefore, Judge, please drop that argument. And secondly, Judge, moving on to how people will work as hard as they can equals to improvement. And Judge, we thought that when suffering is not necessary to people's mind, that doesn't mean that they will actually work extremely hard or exceed their hard working, right? They're actually basically getting in a limited improvement or limited work each time, right? Because for example, if you're having give an example, right? If you're playing basketball, for example, before you feel like you can shoot 5 out of 10, then second time you do not want to exceed, you do not want to suffer, right? You do not want to, for example, practice 1 more hours. Therefore, your ability of playing basketball still maintain the level of 5 out of 10 or things like that, right? You never see a sense of improvement because you never exceed your limit. You never try better than you do last time, right? So you tell a judge doing a bit more better or working a bit more harder, that's a sense of suffering, right? Because you are actually extending your comfort zones. You may not actually feel comfortable of what you're doing, but you're actually being better of yourself, right? Being that better version of yourself is what make it, right? So moving on to weighing, right? So we tell that in our world, it probably look like when people know people know that they should suffer, but it doesn't mean that they will suffer till death. They'll control to what extent that they feel like they're already trying extremely hard suffering, so they feel like they have already tried their best. They feel like they have already tried their best to exceed their limits, and that's when they stop, and that's when they actually feels that they have already done enough, right? And next time they do a little bit better, and next time maybe they become a better version of themselves, right? That's when they look like. That's when suffering tend out to be increased. That's when they feel like suffering worth it, right? That's when you feel the contentment of your suffering actually leads to your happiness, leads to your fulfillment, right? But in our opponent's world, it probably looks like how people are basically feeling that, oh, suffering is maybe not required, right? Even only minority of them truly acknowledge the importance of hard working, but majority of them, because they feel like suffering is not necessary, they will not suffer, and they will choose to, for example, have in their comfort zones maybe a minimum amount of improvement overall. For all these above, I'm so proud to oppose. Vote like up. Thank you.
Before I even begin, let me clarify the motion. This house disbelieves that suffering leads to success. No, the motion is this house opposes the narrative that suffering leads to success. Whether suffering actually is a necessary part of success or not, to be honest, that's a philosophical question. We do not care. The purpose of any narrative is to benefit its stakeholders, benefit the ones receiving the narrative, motivate them to work harder and protect their basic rights. Whether that narrative is 100% true or not, we don't care. This debate has become less and less about which side actually achieves success in a most comfortable, safe, and effective way. It's literally become a debate about the setup and the definitions. They've rebutted all of our definitions, but never have they ever rebutted any of our arguments. First of all, on the word narrative, I don't think opposition understands that narrative in this debate acts as a verb. It means that the narrative is actually pushed by the people who are more powerful in the relationship. For example, the teachers, the parents, the coaches. Opposition is hiding an assumption in their entire 21-minute case today that our stakeholders, like the kids or the trainees, are mature enough to make proper judgment about when to stop suffering. They're saying that they'll be controlled, they'll take a rest when they're needed, they'll make good timetables, they'll make good schedules, they have proper time management. These people are literally young teenagers who are vulnerable. This narrative will change their entire mindset. When suffering becomes a societal norm, they are not capable of jumping outside of this narrative and actually thinking critically. Oh, is what I'm doing safe? Is what this I'm suffering through actually worth the benefit? They have tried to use the characterization of our world as theirs. They're saying that this narrative will mean good control, knowing that people will know when to stop, not suffer until death. But this is exactly what the world looks like without their narrative. In the reality, vulnerable stakeholders with the narrative do not know where to stop, and they're pressured to not stop with this narrative. Word number 2, suffering. They're telling you that suffering equates to hard work. They're using suffering as an umbrella term. If a kid does homework, that's suffering. Every bit of hard work, that's suffering. If someone picks up a pen and wants to write something, that's suffering. Now, the inherent connotation of the word suffering already differs from hard work. It already implies physical and mental harm in the word itself, right? When they claim that our characterization is very extreme, they ignore the fundamental mechanization of this characterization. Suffering. 1, suffering for the sake of suffering. 2, sacrificing free time to suffering. And 3, pressure to the most vulnerable part of our population. So, to summarize, they have used a play of words to glorify their narrative, whereas in the reality, given the unique characteristic of these vulnerable stakeholders, the implementation of this narrative will inherently lead to harmful results in the majority of people. Now, moving on to explaining well-being and success. First of all, success. This is very important, right? We are not comparing zero work to hard work. We are comparing quality hard work to meaningless hard work, even if it's more work. What are they telling you? They're telling you that without this narrative, a student gets a piece of homework. The student looks at the piece of homework and they think suffering is not necessary to success. I don't have to suffer through this math worksheet to learn math, so I'm not going to do this worksheet. That's not how reality works. That's ridiculous. We do not understand why people wouldn't work hard without this narrative. First, motivation. Doesn't everyone want success? And 2, capacity. Everyone can do that worksheet. Students know that homework can help them achieve better learning outcomes. The only difference with and without the narrative is that they know how much suffering is worth the benefit and they know when to stop, right? They would still do that math worksheet. But if a parent or a teacher tells them to do a mountain of worksheets, then they know that it's okay for them to reject. People who try hard will always try hard on both sides, with or without the narrative. Only on opposition side, these people get burned out and they doubt themselves more constantly. So, the points on my PM speech about better time management and how you work smart, not hard, has not even been tried to rebut it on their side. Even if the both sides get this success, the extension point on my deputy speaker's side about the valuation of success, even if they get success, has been completely dropped on their side. Now, well-being. This is really obvious. A quote from the first speech. They say they win the well-being clash because the success of majority is more important than the well-being of minority. First of all, that's not how you win a clash. Okay, you cannot just avoid the issue and not actually take it on. Second of all, well-being is not an issue for the minority. It's not just like 10 students dying every year and it's not a minority issue, right? They have simply discarded our point as extreme and unlikely. But it's clear that severe physical and mental harms will likely happen on our side, way worse than the already bad status quo. They say that their narrative doesn't force students to go to die, so there will be very little students actually dying and getting harmed. But the harsh reality is that once you implement this narrative, even if this narrative doesn't force them to death, these detrimental outcomes become more likely to happen as compared to the status quo. Therefore, never power to propose. Thank you.